ask that everyone take their seats, and I will welcome you. I'm County Supervisor Joe Simidian, and we have a custom and practice at this event in an effort to respect everybody's time. We always start promptly 3 minutes late. That is our rule. Like, he's double checking me. We're promptly 3 minutes late, so everybody can get in, get parked, find their way into the room. I'm sure we'll have a few more folks joining us shortly, but particularly because we have a number of folks online tonight. This is the first time we've done this get together as a hybrid. So for the panelists who are here who are wondering, we have more than 100 who are registered, and they are joining us even as we speak, as well as the folks who are in the room. So again, I'm County Supervisor Joe Simidian. I want to thank you for being here. This is our 8th annual Lehigh meeting, and some of you will know that we began holding these meetings when I came back on the board in 2013, 2014, around then, because my sense was that the community had a great many questions about operations at Lehigh, and it wasn't always easy to figure out how to get those questions answered. So tonight, our hope is that we'll be able to get answers to your questions, and when I say your questions, I mean not only those who are seated here, but those who are participating virtually. And we'll make sure that we get to as many questions as we possibly can, which is why I wanted to start promptly 3 minutes late. We have a wonderful panel of state and local regulators who are here to help answer those questions. And after some background remarks on my part, we will get right to it. I want to just start by providing a little bit of context. And as you'll learn in a few minutes, tonight is a little bit different than previous conversations because there have been some recent developments that we want to share. I think it is helpful and important to remember that while people use the shorthand Lehigh for all of the activities at the facility, there are in fact two distinct and separate operations. There is the cement plant and there is the quarry. And while they are obviously inexorably interwoven, they are two very different operations. They are governed by different bodies of law, which will become relevant and apparent here in just a couple of minutes. And the other thing I should mention is that these two facilities or operations are on a 3,500 acre parcel. I do get asked fairly frequently, how big is it? And the answer is the Lehigh property is 3,500 acres. Most of it, probably 3/4 of it, is in the unincorporated county, meaning it is not within anybody's city limits, and that's where the plant and the quarry are. But a significant portion of the 3,500 acres is in the City of Cupertino, where we now are sitting and standing, and there's actually a significant portion of it in the city of Palo Alto, which sometimes comes as a surprise to folks because there is a big chunk of Palo Alto actually on one side of the property. I do think it's helpful for me to share with you all, and you'll see why this is self-interested on my part in a minute, but I want to share with you all the fact that prior to my return on the Board of Supervisors back in 2013, and again I want to underscore that prior to my return to the Board of Supervisors, the Board of Supervisors here in Santa Clara County took two important actions. In 2011, the board made a determination of what's called vested rights. And the vested rights was a determination about where mining activities could occur without a use permit. In other words, the Board of Supervisors said, we want to acknowledge that there are vested rights for mining activity on this particular piece of the property, and that was a determination back in 2011. And that, as I say, was important because it essentially identified that portion of the 3,500 acres where mining could occur without a use permit as a matter of vested rights. And probably 2,200 acres out of the 3,500 acres up there was identified by the Board of Supervisors at that time as being vested, meaning there was a certain entitlement to continue the activity that had been going on for a long time. And proposals to mine outside that 2,200 acres are treated somewhat differently. They clearly do require a use permit from the county, and that will become relevant and useful information here in a little bit as we talk. Then in 2012, the following year, and Again, before I came back on the Board of Supervisors, the Board of Supervisors approved an amendment to what's known as the quarry's reclamation plan. And while that is really the technically correct term, the reclamation plan describes what has to happen on the site to reclaim the property eventually, but the reclamation plan is also an indicator of what kind of activity is going to be permitted on the site, because that's how you know what you need to fix one day in the future. So there was a reclamation plan that was approved back in 2012, and that probably encompasses more than a third of the property. And as I say, it outlines the plan and timing for how the site will be restored once the mining activity has been concluded. Now, both sets of decisions, the issue about vested rights and the issue of the issue of vested rights and the issue of the reclamation plan were politically contentious, ended up in court. In both cases, the county's decisions were upheld. Doesn't mean you would necessarily like them, dislike them, good, bad, right, wrong. Just means they were legally upheld. And so I wanted to share with you the fact that this debate had taken place in the courts and it had been resolved. And they are, both of those decisions essentially have sort of guided what we could or couldn't do in the decade plus now since they were made. Since being sworn in 2013, when I came back to the board, I had been on the board many years previously for one term, came back in 2013 after I was in Sacramento for a while, and my office and I have taken steps to try and increase oversight in ways that are, both large and small, frankly. I would say most of them were fairly modest in my own assessment, but taken together, the effort was to develop a more rigorous and robust program of oversight at the county. So making sure that there were frequent visits by county staff to the site itself, which had not been happening, frankly, previously. The goal was to have what I call monthly boots on the ground, coordinating meetings with these various state and local regulatory agencies, as well as federal agencies that are sometimes involved. Things as simple as making sure that all the conditions of approval had been satisfactorily met. There turned out there was a surety bond that wasn't current at one point when we took a look. Simple things like upgrading the website so people could get the information they needed. More frequent updates to our board about what was happening and to the relevant committees. Even, again, as simple a thing as a monthly call from my office to the folks at Lehigh to say, let us tell you what we're concerned about, tell us what you think is happening on the site, but just to improve the communication. Stepping up of noise monitoring, which at various points has been a concern for particular segments of the community. Annual town halls like this one, so people could get the answers to their questions and also know who they can contact after tonight's meeting. And outside expert review of the fiscal assurances that are necessary to make sure that when this thing gets put back together again, there are sufficient funds there. As I say, all of these sort of incremental, taken together, the notion was let's step it up a little bit, and I think that was all to the good. But I think the most significant developments have taken place, I would really say, since 2019. And so I want to pivot a little bit and tell you then what happened in 2019. In 2019, the folks at Lehigh submitted a new reclamation plan. Now, again, I keep using the term reclamation plan because that's the legal term of art, but a reclamation plan is really an indication of here's what we're planning to do in the future. And what it indicated pretty clearly was that the plan at that time, and I want to underscore at that time, was to expand mining operations on the 3,500 acres. And the easiest way to put this in layperson's language is to say there was a great big hole in the ground. It was pretty well played out. What happens next? Some folks, I think, were hoping that that would be the end of that. And Lehigh indicated in 2019, no, actually, there are plans to do more, and here's how we would like to go about doing that, and here's how we would then restore and reclaim the site when the time came. There was an interesting aspect to that proposal in 2019, and here you're going to have to live with my not very sophisticated visual aids. The plan envisioned, as it was submitted in 2019, taking down the top of the hillside in order to quarry. And that was somewhat perplexing at the county level, and the county staff can clarify or correct anything I say a little bit later if they wish. That was somewhat perplexing at the county level because our county has an easement, a guarantee that the hillside will be protected. So as you can imagine, people were saying, well, wait a minute, we have this hillside protection, we think, and yet we have a proposal that envisions taking down the hillside, which presumably would have required a majority of the board to say we're willing to give up the protection that the easement provides. In an effort to ensure that that did not happen, working with county staff and our county council, who you'll meet here in a few minutes, my office and I pursued an agreement with the Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District. That is a body full of elected folks. They're responsible for open space on the Mid-Peninsula, cleverly enough, and said, why don't we share our easement enforcement rights with you? Meaning that if the Board of Supervisors ever said yes to taking down the hillsides, that the Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District could say, no, 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 we're enforcing the easement because you've given us the right to do that as a result of a negotiated agreement. We did in fact put that together. We had a sort of a brief mini campaign to make sure people knew what we were doing. I was joking earlier today with some folks. I was trying to figure out how to explain all that more simply and much more crisply than I just imposed on you. And the way I came up with of doing that was to say, don't chop the top. And everybody seemed to, yeah, see, it's kind of, but everybody sort of said, yeah, now I understand. Don't chop the top, because it would have meant bringing down the hillside by 100 vertical feet. More if you think about the slope, but 100 vertical feet. So the county shared its enforcement authority and sent, I thought, a very clear message, and that would have been about 2021 by the time we finally got all that wrapped up, sent a very clear message to both the public but also the folks at Lehigh. You know, we have this legal right to protect the hillside. You should anticipate that we're going to enforce that legal right. Then in 2022, as I was sort of thinking about, all right, now what can we do to continue to ramp up our efforts at protecting this area, I asked the county council's office, and you'll meet these folks again in a minute, and the county planning department, if they would do a 10-year look back for violations on the site by Lehigh. And that was a little bit muddled because it was both the plant and the quarry, so both. And what I was dealing with, and I've gotten this at previous hearings from some of you, so thank you for raising it, was, you know, there's sort of drip, drip, drip of violations. There may not be anything that in and of itself, you know, brings everything to a halt, but there certainly were a lot of violations over the years. So I asked county council and our planning department to tell us, all right, look back over 10 years, talk to all the various departments and agencies, federal, state, regional, local, and say how many violations were there. And they came back with an answer pretty expeditiously, actually, and said the answer is there were more than 2,135 violations over a 10-year period. Now, to be fair, not all of them were major, but a number of them were. And even if they're minor, 2,135 is a lot of violations. That meant we could then have a conversation about whether or not the cement plant operations were being run in a way that was consistent with the use permit, which is the legal document that gives them the right to operate that plant. And one of the provisions in the use permit says, in addition to doing this, 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 and this, you have to follow the law. Your operations have to be consistent with federal, state, regional, and local law. So if you have 2,135 violations over 10 years, there's a pretty good argument to be made that that's not happening. Now, The folks at Lehigh, again, to be fair, would tell you, well, just because we got a notice of violation doesn't mean there was a violation. It means you all thought there was a violation. Okay, I want to sort of, raise that and share it with you because that's what the conversation started to sound like. And as the result of having that report, I was then able to ask my colleagues, and we have a 5-member board of supervisors. Each one of us represents a district, and Lehigh is in my district, our district, here in District 5 as it's known. And I was able to ask my colleagues, given the level of violations over such a long period of time, could we please refer this matter to our county planning commission for the possible revocation, revoking, taking away, or amendment of the use permit, particularly with respect to the plant. And the rules are a little different, and I won't belabor this point. With respect to the quarry, that's a sort of a matter of going to court if you think that there's a public nuisance. And so we also directed our staff to take a look at that possibility as well, because again, 2 different operations, even though we think of them as linked, 2 different sets of law that governs the 2. So we sent the matter off to the Planning Commission, as I said, and now things are getting serious. And at that point, the folks at Lehigh and I are in a series of conversations with my office and me. And I should mention, along the way, I've said, it is time to think about a new vision for the site, possibly including public acquisition and use as open space one day, although funding such a venture is not a small challenge. Lehigh, as we talk, says, okay, we are ready to make 2 important announcements. The first announcement is that our plant has been shuttered during the pandemic, and we're prepared to announce that we will leave it shuttered. We will not reopen it, which is a pretty big deal. The second announcement, and I'm going to look to my capable staff person, Christina Loquist, who I want to say thank you to again for helping to make this possible, along with the rest of our team. The second part of the announcement, this was in November of last year, was, and by the way, we're going to stop quarrying limestone from the big hole in the ground, the quarry, the pit, and that is the second big announcement. We're going to leave the plant permanently shuttered. We're not going to reopen it, and we're going to stop the quarrying activity, which is not everything that goes on up there, but a pretty big chunk of what goes on up there. So that was shared in November of 2022, just half a dozen months ago. And we had referred these matters, as I said, to our legal counsel and to the Planning Commission. And as we talked this through at the county and in my office, I came to the conclusion that I had, and this is what I said at the time, I had 3 goals. And this is the first time I have shared these. In years past, I've just sort of said, expect everybody to follow the rules. But this, for the first time, I said, I want to see the plant closed, I want to see the quarrying activity stopped, and I want us to get started on restoring and reclaiming the site. You could have just come for that 30 seconds and stayed home and had a nice night. So I'm sorry about that. Close the plant, stop the quarrying activity, start to restore and reclaim the site. The folks at Lehigh had given a pretty clear indication that they were, okay with the first 2 in many respects. The question is, how do you make that real? How do you make sure that happens? And how do you make sure that once it happens, somebody doesn't change their mind? Times pass, circumstances change, people have new business plans, ownership changes as it has on the site. Many of you know that over the decades. So my thinking was and is, and I want to share that with you and the folks who are with us virtually, my thinking was and is that we need a legally binding agreement that shuts the cement plant down permanently. And the best way to do that is through the use permit, which currently allows that. So even though Lehigh says we don't have any plans to start up again, the use permit that they currently hold allows that to happen. And 2 weeks ago, I flew to Dallas, which is actually Irving, Texas, is where the North American headquarters is for the Lehigh folks, who go by the official title Heidelberg Cement. Had a series of meetings with them there at their North American headquarters in Irving, Texas, and said, I'm about to bring this proposal to the full Board of Supervisors. Wanted to let you know that, and also want to make the case to you that since you said you're going to shut it down and have no plans to open it, that the smart thing to do here would be to say we're prepared to put that in writing and negotiate an agreement with the county that says the end, we're done, and take this out of your use permit so that my sometimes skeptical constituents don't have to wonder, is this for real? Is this going to last? And if we could get such an agreement in relatively short order, by which I mean the next 3 months, then I would be prepared to provide a little timeout on the activity at the Planning Commission so that the folks at Lehigh could sit down with the folks at our county, our planning department, and our county counsel's office and negotiate all of the many other complex parts of untangling this operation. Please bear in mind the cement plant's been operating for 80 plus years. The quarry's been operating for more than a century. It's 3,500 acres. It's not all going to get sorted in the next day, next week, next month, or next year. But the thing I want to make sure we grab while the grabbing is good is a firm commitment that the plant is shut down, because I think that is the key to making the rest of it all happen. I'm glad I went to Dallas. I hadn't been in 30 years, and the meetings were good. I came back with a cold, unfortunately, and such is life. But it was a good conversation, and I know you'll hear a little bit more about that this evening. But that is sort of where things stand. As a result, my board colleagues were willing to provide the direction I just suggested. So on Tuesday of just this past week, we took the formal action to direct the staff to try and negotiate such an agreement with Lehigh. We also coincidentally directed our staff to please work with the City of Cupertino to make sure that everybody is on the same page, because there is that big chunk of the property that is in Cupertino, and it has a particular relevance that I'll describe in just a few minutes. So, as I said, after all these years wrestling with this one, I think I can finally just summarize it by saying I got 3 goals: close the Lehigh cement plant, stop the mining activity in the quarry, and begin the restoration and reclamation of the property. Those are the 3 goals. Now, before we finally get started here, and thank you for your patience with all that, I do want to thank the City of Cupertino for hosting us again this evening, which they have done every year, and really appreciate it. Always gracious hosts and very helpful. And I understand they provided the drinks. Christina, is that no? Yes? No? Okay. Come on up. You're always a welcome guest. So thank you to the City of Cupertino. No worries. We have held it here because I think the more we can do out in the community, the better. I think expecting people to make their way at rush hour to 70 West Heading Street in San Jose is not ideal, I'll put it that way. And so we really do appreciate the fact that the city accommodates us here year after year after year in a place that is relatively convenient and accessible for folks. I also want to recognize some of the elected officials who have RSVP'd and who I see present here, and thank them for their representation here tonight. And let me just make sure, and if I miss you, which is always the risk, I'm going to ask that you stand, raise your hand, and announce who you are and your jurisdiction. But I know I see from Cupertino, Mayor Hung Wei, who is here, and I also see Vice Mayor Sheila Mohan. Thank you, Madam Vice Mayor. And I'm pretty sure I saw Councilmember Liang Chow. Where's Liang? No? I thought I saw her. I knew she was hoping to come. And Kitty Moore is right here, also from Cupertino. Los Altos, the mayor, Sally Meadows, is participating virtually. But we do have Council Member Lynette Lee Eng, who was right here in front of me. There you are. Thank you. Hi, thank you, Council Member, for being here. Nisa Flieger, who is here, and we always have to say Nisa rhymes with Lisa, Flieger rhymes with Tiger. That's how you know how to pronounce her name properly. From Los Gatos, I know we're hoping to get a couple of the council members. Were either of them? I met earlier today with Mayor Ristow and some others from the West Valley, so she's fully up to speed and engaged as well. From Montessorino, Councilmember Rowena Turner. Councilmember, thank you for being here. From Saratoga, I saw Councilmember Tina Willier right here in the front. Thank you for being here. And also Vice Mayor Yan Zhao, former mayor as well. And we may be joined by Mayor Cookie Fitzsimmons, but again, she was part of an earlier conversation we had today, so she's up to speed and knows what's what. I want to thank them all for the time that they gave. Was Councilmember Linda Sell able to join us? There you are in the back. Thank you for being here, Councilmember. From Sunnyvale and from Mid-Peninsula, we have Director Kurt Riffle, who is joining us virtually. And I know that Yuriko Kishimoto was hoping to make the meeting, but I don't see her in the room. But again, MidPen has been a key partner in all this. Zach Contini from State Senator Dave Cortese's office. Zach, where are you? There you are. Thank you for being here on behalf of Senator Cortese, who is familiar with these issues because he previously served on the Board of Supervisors. So he knows what the Lehigh cement plant is and where it is. And then last but not least, Tom Pike, who's the district director for Congressman Ro Khanna. Thank you for being here, Tom, and thank the congressman, please, for his engagement and sharing you with us this evening. Now, did I leave any of the elected officials out? Yes, I did. You don't want to leave out the mayor of Los Altos Hills when it's one of your 9 cities, and that is Mayor Linda Swan from Los Altos Hills. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't know how I missed you right in my line of sight in the front row on the corner, but somehow I managed to do that. Anyone else? And in the back, yes. Oh, Lydia Koo? Thank you, Lydia. Sorry, Lydia. Lydia Koo from Palo Alto, who is the mayor there. And I mentioned earlier that often folks are surprised that there is, in fact, a chunk of the 3,500 acres that is at one end of the property that is in Palo Alto, given Palo Alto's geography. So thank you all for being here again, and I thank all of you who joined us for the conversation tonight. And the last thing I will say is, if you're wondering how this conversation is going to unfold now that we're sort of well and truly in it, it will be a little bit different than in the past, because this year we have people attending, as I said, both virtually and in person. Typically this room would be full. Tonight, a lot of these folks are sitting at home in their bunny slippers, presumably watching the session. And if you're here in person and would like to ask a question of the panel, you can write your question on one of the cards we've provided and hand it to any one of the folks from my office. So if you see Christina Loquist here, or Killian there, or Kelsey in the back, thank you. If you just raise your card, they will come and get it and put it in the queue. And as I say, there should have been a card on everybody's seat. If there wasn't for any reason, just raise your hand and somebody will bring you one. And if you're joining us online, and I know there are folks out there joining us online, you can type a question into the Q&A function. Again, type a question into the Q&A function, and one of the folks from my office will get me that question as well. I should say, we will not, for those of you online, we will not be using the raised hand function. So it's the Q&A function if you would like to be in touch. Also, I know a number of you have submitted questions in advance. Thank you. We have them, and they will be shared with me as we try and pull topics together by subject matter and go through the evening, and I'll do my best to get to as many as I possibly can. But I'm going to start off by asking the panel to introduce themselves and give us a brief update on what they've been up to over the past year or so with respect to Lehigh. And I will have a starter question or two for each of these folks as well. We will adjourn promptly at 8:30 so that everyone can get a decent night's sleep. And finally, I should mention that tonight's meeting is being recorded and will be made available to the public on our website, my office's website, in the next day or so. It usually is a pretty quick turnaround, and that's supervisorsemidian.org, supervisorsemidian.org. Okay, let's get to it. First, I want to thank our panelists for joining us. We're clearly beyond normal business hours for folks, and I appreciate your attendance, truly. And I know the community does as well from past meetings that we've had, especially since we're back to an in-person format. And as you see, these folks are right here with us. And I also know some of you have had to travel considerable distances and will be traveling considerable distances to get home. Panel members, when I come to you, please briefly introduce yourself, as I said, then tell us your name, your agency's name. So I might say, hi, I'm Joe Simidian. I'm with the County of Santa Clara. And then give us a brief overview of what you regulate at Lehigh. What is your regulatory function? And then, as I say, I will have a question or two for all of you to get us started. We'll work our way through the entire panel, and we're going to start with the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, to be followed then by the Regional Water Quality Control Board. So let's start with folks from the Air District. And I was prepared for Ms. Leong and Mr. Nudd. Who do we have?
Hello, my name is Pamela Leong. I'm the Director of Engineering at the Air District, and that's the division that does all the permitting of the stationary sources at the Lehigh plant.
And we're going to, I rarely try and tell engineers what to do, but if you will pull the microphone a little bit closer, I think it will help everybody hear you. Thank you.
And I'm Greg Nudd. I'm the Deputy for Policy at the Air District, and the Air District has authority over the air pollution emissions at the cement plant. And a lot of really the most active work that's going on has been in Pam's shop. So she'll lead us off with an update, if that's all right with you, Supervisor Simidian.
Please. First question, though, is, as I shared earlier, we've heard that the cement plant has been shuttered since April 2020. And I think folks here are probably wondering if Lehigh wanted to restart operations tomorrow, if they said, okay, we've changed our minds again, if they wanted to restart operations tomorrow, would they have to go through any sort of review with the Air Board, or could they just restart operations? So what's the state of play?
Okay, as you mentioned, they've been shut down. The main sources of the facility have been shut down. That's the cement kiln, the clinker cooler, and the 4 mills have been shut down since April 2020. They had maintained their permits to operate until last year, so they just gave up their permits effective May 31st, 2022. And what that means is you fill out a form, you say you're not going to operate it anymore, and we close it out in our system, and it says you cannot operate those again without reapplying for a new permit. So they cannot restart those. They would have to reapply for a new permit, and they would be subject to the newer stringent regulations that we have on the books, and that would include best available control technology for those pieces of equipment.
Let me just interrupt, Ms. Leong, and I told the panelists I would. Feel free to interrupt them, so they are well prepared. That's kind of a big deal, so I don't want us to gloss over it. What I just heard you tell everyone, and I'm going to translate it into the simplest, and if I oversimplify, you'll correct me, simplest possible language is, if they wanted to start up again, they'd need a new permit. If they wanted to get a new permit, they'd have to use state-of-the-art 21st century up-to-date technology, and that's a very big deal in terms of higher standards, cleaner standards, and a substantial cost, I would imagine, yes?
Yes, that's correct. So remember, it's for the cement kiln, the clinker cooler, and the 4 mills, but those are the main, pieces of the production there at the facility.
Okay. So with the kiln shut down, for the time being at least, are there other aspects of operations where your air district still has regulatory authority?
Pam, why don't you talk a little bit more, because I think there's still some things you're trying to straighten out about bringing in clinker and processing clinker, right?
Right.
And you might tell everybody what clinker is, by the way.
So they mine it and they heat it up and grind it, and it's used to make Portland cement. So they still have some clinker on site. So we have to contact the plant, figure out how they're going to, whether they're going to process that or if they're going to take that off site. But they also have a rock plant that's an aggregate plant. So at the aggregate plant, I have all the details. At what we call the rock plant, they continue to operate that, and what they're doing is they process aggregate, so they have crushers, screens, conveyors, and storage piles, and so they have haul trucks and front loaders that transport materials to and from the rock plant, and delivery and customer trucks go get the aggregate for their yard, things like that. So they still are operating the aggregate plant.
And you are still exercising regulatory authority over that activity?
Yes, exactly.
All right.
And other kind of dust sources at the site, dust kicked up by the trucks, that sort of thing would also continue to fall under our regulatory authority.
So I'm going to try and put words in your mouth, and if you don't want to let me, you'll tell me. So in other words, even though the kiln is shut down, there is still activity on the site. That activity still has implications for air quality, and because it still has implications for air quality, you are still on the job providing regulatory oversight, yes?
That is accurate.
Okay. So let's turn for the moment from air to water, because we have, I believe, Ms. Watkins and Mr. Is it Robertson or Robertson?
Robertson's fine.
Robertson?
I pronounce it Roberson, but...
No, it's your
okay.
name. I was telling Mr. Roberson earlier, I have been Semidian my whole life, but I've also been Semitian, Semitan, Semitane, and the only time I took offense was when somebody called me Senator Stupidian, which I was pretty sure was not an accident. So, Mr. Roberson, I want to get your name right, yours and Ms. Watkins. They are with us from the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Quality Control Board, so we're underwater. And I would ask you all to share your roles at the Regional Water Quality Control Board, scope of your regulatory authority for your agency, and then I will have a specific question or two.
Okay. Can you hear me okay? My name is Keith Roberson, as he said. I'm the Land Disposal Program Manager for the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Board. We oversee, or I manage a group of 5 full-time people. We oversee all of the landfills within the San Francisco Bay region, and there are a lot of them, all the active ones as well as all the closed landfills. You're probably wondering, what does that have to do with Lehigh? We regulate landfills they're called land disposal sites, and there's a body of California regulations called Title 27 that regulates disposal to land. And that set of regulations also includes waste rock piles from mining operations. And you're probably aware there are quite a few mines, most of which are abandoned in the Bay Area, a lot of mercury mines. But we regulate the waste rock piles at the Lehigh facility under what we call waste discharge requirements and order. We regulate water quality under the waste discharge requirements order because waste rock piles have a potential to impact water quality. I'll also add that we regulate surface water, stormwater runoff, as well as impacts to groundwater at the Lehigh facility. I'll turn it over to my supervisor, Jessica.
Good evening. My name is Jessica Watkins. I'm our manager of the Groundwater Protection and Waste Containment Division at the Regional Water Board. So we are one of 5 divisions at the Water Board, and we protect water quality in the 9 Bay Area counties. And in addition to the Groundwater Protection Division being involved with this, we also have our Watershed Division. They would be involved with any work in creeks or restoration that's going on. We also have our MPDS, and that's MPDS Wastewater and Enforcement Division, and they would be involved with regulating any surface or stormwater discharges to Permanente Creek. And I'm currently the division manager. I've been in that role for less than a year. Prior to that, I was a supervisor in our MPDS Wastewater and Enforcement Division.
Ms. Watkins, forgive me. Ms. Watkins, did I hear you use an acronym, NP?
Yes, I did.
There's $1 in the acronym
caught
jar
me.
for that, by the way. So, and what is that acronym again, please?
It's NPDES, so it's the National Pollutant Elimination Discharge System. And it's the way that we implement the Clean Water Act. And basically, it's just a fancy way to say that we protect surface waters by implementing federal regulations.
Got it.
That's it.
Thank you for that. And I think you know that we are anticipating the submission of an amendment to Lehigh's reclamation plan. They have not moved forward on the 2019 plan. We expect a new set of proposed amendments, I think literally in the next month or two if they stay on schedule. And the current plan, the one that's in place, calls for using what's called overburden, you and I might call it leftovers, for the purpose of refilling the pit. Big hole in the ground, stuff sitting by the big hole in the ground, called overburden, I call it leftovers. So the current plan calls for using that overburden to refill the pit, and when the folks at Lehigh submitted a proposed amendment in 2019, they signaled an interest in substituting what they described as clean fill rather than using the overburden as the material to backfill the pit. In other words, what we thought we were seeing and hearing from folks at Lehigh in 2019 was an indication that rather than push stuff back in the pit, they wanted to import clean fill. And I guess the question I would ask for folks from the Water District is, or the Water Board is, is there a sort of a high-level overview you can give us about how you go about evaluating what to allow and with what kind of conditions when it comes to this question about backfilling the large holes in the ground, the big pit that's there? So what does that conversation look like in the future if you get such a request?
In some ways, the material that came out of the pit seems like the perfect material to use to refill the pit. Just put it back where it came from. The waste rock, as I mentioned earlier, is in two large piles, which we call the east material storage area, the west material storage area. They're very big mounds of, as Supervisor Simidian said, overburden, or it's waste rock. It's the material that was not of significant value to the cement making process. When they were quarrying when they were operating the quarry, the material they were trying to get at is limestone. That's what had value. The limestone that came out of the pit is largely gone because it was used in the processing of cement and also crushed rock, and that's largely left the site. What's left over is the material that's really just waste rock. And in the Water Board's opinion, we would very much like to see that go back into the pit. There are some things to be concerned about. That rock has been pulverized. It's in smaller pieces. It's not intact bedrock the way it was when it was, before the quarrying occurred. So we have to be concerned about the greater surface area of the waste rock and certain constituents that are within the rock, like metals, metalloids like selenium. We want to make sure that the concentrations of those are not going to pose a threat to water quality if it goes back in the pit. But I think the simple reality is that the volume of material that's in the waste rock piles is probably not enough to completely fill the pit. So it seems to me like there probably will have to be some importation of fill from outside the facility. Based on the most recent conversations I've had with the Lehigh folks, I think that's what they're considering doing. But I'm eagerly awaiting the amended reclamation plan to see what the most recent proposal is.
And Mr. Robertson, just to follow up on that, presumably then somebody has to figure out whether the stuff they want to put back in the big hole in the ground is safe, and somebody would also have to figure out if they wanted to bring in new fill, whether it was safe from a water quality standpoint, yes?
Absolutely, yeah. If fill is imported, Lehigh would have to submit a plan that would have to be approved by our agency that describes the process of how import fill sources will be identified, how they'll be screened for suitability. They'll have to do sampling and analysis of any material that's imported to the site, and we would have to approve that material. We have experience with this in other sites, so it's not the first time we've done this. There's a quarry called the Dumbarton Quarry. It's on the eastern end of the Dumbarton Bridge. They've been backfilling that pit with imported material, and we have, held them to a set of standards for importing fill there. That one being right beside the bay is probably less of concern to us than the Lehigh pit would be, given that there's a creek that flows right by Lehigh, and it's also perched above the Santa Clara Valley aquifer system. So.
All right, thank you. And when you said we would have to approve, you're talking about the Regional Water Quality Control Board would have to review and approve the fill that goes back in the hole to make sure it is safe from a water quality standpoint, yes?
That's correct.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So now, I was going to say at the risk of stating the obvious, but let me just state the obvious. We all know we've had heavy rains this winter. So let me ask the folks from the Regional Water Quality Control Board, have there been any water quality issues or violations in the last year at Lehigh that you can share with the public tonight, in part related to the heavy rains, which has obviously made things a little different on site?
We're both going to speak on this topic.
Go.
Okay, so I'll go first. There are a couple violations that I could share that happened in the last year that are not related to the rains, and then I'll pass it off to Keith. So in April of last year, there was an effluent limit violation at one of the stormwater outfalls. And what that basically means is that the stormwater is discharged to the creek, and it needs to meet certain standards for different chemicals, have certain concentrations. And one of the average monthly settlable solids effluent limit was violated, and that was for the average for the month. And so that is actually subject to a mandatory minimum penalty of at least $3,000. And then that's just the minimum that our board is required by law to consider. So that happened in April. Enforcement for that is pending. In July 29th of 2022, there was actually for either 29 or 30 days, I don't really know the details, but let's say for about 30 days, starting in July to August, there was a 15 million gallon drinking water spill to Permanente Creek. And for those of you who might not yet know, that drinking water has chlorine in it, and that's acutely toxic to fish. So that's why it's an issue to be discharged to Permanente Creek. So that is something that we are thinking about, and enforcement is also pending for that. The reason it went on for 30 days is because Lehigh did not know that it was going on. The freshwater tank is in, I believe, a pretty somewhat remote location on the property, and so they didn't know it was happening at the time. But when they found out that it was stopped within a day. So there were chlorine impacts to the creek. That occurred during the summer, and during the summer they don't discharge, so there were really either low or no flow conditions in the creek. And so there were no observed impacts to fish or frogs in the creek at that time. And with that, I'm sure there might be lots of interest in that topic, but I'll pass it off to Keith.
I just wanted to mention that there's another portion of the site where a landslide occurred. I want to say it was in 2019, but I'm not certain about that. But it's called the Jaeger Yard, and there was some movement of earth that went down into the direction of the Permanente Creek. And Lehigh took corrective actions to get that slope stabilized. There's a sedimentation pond there to capture stormwater runoff from that area. But we were concerned how that slope was going to hold up during this rainy winter, and it is my understanding that there was at least one incidence of stormwater runoff overtopping the sedimentation pond and going into the creek, so that would be a release of stormwater. If there's been any sediment actually reaching the creek. I'm not really sure about that. It's my understanding that the area has been deemed really too unsafe to go out and do anything to it until it dries out a bit. But my staff will be inspecting that area as soon as we get out there.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to move on to Valley Water, which should not be confused with the Regional Water Quality Control Board, even though they both deal with water. Valley Water is different, and I'm going to turn to Mr. Tick, who's going to introduce himself and explain Valley Water's role, and then again, a couple of questions for that agency.
Well, thank you very much, Supervisor Smitty, and it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Jeff Tick. I'm with Valley Water. I'm the Senior Water Resources Specialist as part of the Groundwater Management Unit there at Valley Water. For those of you, again, unfamiliar with Valley Water, we're an agency that provides safe, clean water. We also provide flood protection as well as stewardship of the streams and creeks in Santa Clara Valley. We own, and we're also, a groundwater sustainability agency. We own and operate over 10 reservoirs, 3 water treatment plants, 1 water purification center, and we manage about 270 miles of creeks and streams within Santa Clara Valley, Santa Clara County. We actively manage and monitor local groundwater basins and replenish them with both local and imported surface water as well. In terms of Lehigh specifically, Valley Water doesn't oversee any of Lehigh operations, as the regional board is the regulatory authority over both the groundwater and surface water in the region. However, we do work closely with the regulatory agencies as well as land use agencies and other stakeholders to protect the water and quality and provide technical assistance when needed. Yeah.
All right, let me say thank you for that. And Mr. Tick, you mentioned impacts to groundwater and drinking water, which are top of mind for a lot of the folks I talk to about Lehigh. So I believe, if I'm recalling correctly, there are some groundwater wells that you have been monitoring. Can you update us on any findings in connection with those?
Yes, certainly. Valley Water analyzes groundwater quality data from public water supply wells and dedicated monitoring and domestic wells in the groundwater basins beneath the valley floor. The data is summarized annually and available on our website at valleywater.org, so you can find many details under the groundwater link there under that webpage. Specifically, Lehigh is outside of the groundwater basin that we actively manage. Lehigh sits atop primarily deformed and fractured bedrock. We manage the groundwater basin that's downstream of Lehigh proper, and with that, we do analyze the data. We've recently done a synthesis analyzing trace metals and trace elements, of which some were mentioned here, including arsenic, mercury, and selenium from water supply wells that are, again, just down gradient within the groundwater basin of the Santa Clara Valley and downstream of Lehigh proper. So there, these trace elements, only 3 to 8% were detected of 400 samples that we collected, and of those that were detected, all of the detections fall well below of any state or federal levels. In fact, they are all well below half of the allowable levels that the state and or federal guidelines mandate. So with that, the groundwater quality and the water supply wells downstream of Lehigh show high water quality. They're consistent, again, with the groundwater quality that's over the greater portion of the subbasins of Santa Clara Valley as well. So there's nothing that's outstanding that we see. in terms of the groundwater quality just from the public water supply wells that we analyze.
Thank you. One of the questions that has come up from time to time is one that I think we are well-timed to ask you to address, because it's my understanding that at its meeting on March 29th, your board's Water Storage Exploratory Committee, somebody has to do this work, your board's Water Storage Exploratory Committee received a report from Valley Water staff about the feasibility of using the Lehigh pit as a potential site for water storage at some point in the future, what I would call a reservoir. Can you give us sort of a shorthand on what the report said?
Absolutely, yes. So this was a recent meeting with our board of directors, as you mentioned, March 29th. This is related, as you know, to a study that Valley Water conducted in 2022 to evaluate the quarry site as a raw water storage facility. The overall conclusion was that there would be a small water supply and flood control benefit, and that the cost and feasibility and of that project and the challenges that were associated far outweigh the potential benefits. And so as it stands, the Valley Water staff recommended that no further evaluation be conducted, and the Valley Water Board Committee agreed. There were several different alternatives that were proposed. The costs were quite high, including infrastructure, including water rights purchases, property acquisitions, and whatnot. And the benefit just wasn't there compared to the costs.
All right, thank you for that. Before I turn to our host, the City of Cupertino, I did want to mention that I am now aware that Senator Becker's office, State Senator Josh Becker's office, is represented online because Helen Wolter from the Senator's office is there. Thank you to Senator Becker's office. And also Palo Alto's Vice Mayor Greer Stone is online. So thank you for participating virtually as well. And there may be other electeds who are participating that we haven't captured yet, but really a wonderful turnout. Thank you so much for your engagement. I do want to turn to our host, the City of Cupertino, who is represented tonight by the city's city manager, Ms. Pamela Wu. Ms. Wu, I was going to say welcome as I have to everybody else, but I can't really say welcome to you since this is your home base. So instead, I'll just say thank you again for opening it up to us all tonight. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit, and then I will have a question or two for you as well.
Of course. Thank you, Supervisor Smith.
And hang on, we're not live yet for some reason. Let's see.
I think I'm red, but am I live now? No. Can I borrow your microphone? Thank you. Improvise is my new strategy. Good evening. Thank you, Supervisor Smithian. My name is Pamela Wu, City Manager for City of Cupertino. Welcome all of you who are in the community hall with us and those who are online, and also council members from our neighboring cities, Mayor Wade, Vice Mayor Mohan, and Councilmember Moore joining us tonight. And I also want to thank Supervisor Smithian and your staff in partnership with City of Cupertino in hosting the 8th annual town hall meeting here in Community Hall. Do want to emphasize that this session is being recorded. Not only it will be uploaded to the county website, it will also be available on the city's website. So in terms of the regulatory functions for City of Cupertino, at this juncture, the city has limited oversight of the regulatory functions of Lehigh. However, understanding that one of Supervisor Smithian's referral will give the City of Cupertino a great opportunity to work with county staff in exploring the future development within the Lehigh property. There are a number of properties that are currently within city proper. And greater number that are within city's sphere influence. We're looking forward to explore a policy framework with both county in determining the quarry's future. In addition to that, the city has been working with the county as well as Lehigh on the unpermitted grading that occurred some time ago, understanding that Lehigh is working actively with both city and the county in abating the unpermitted work.
Thank you. Anything you can share with us about where things stand with respect to those Cupertino-specific parcels? Any future plans either Lehigh or the city may have for that portion, or too soon?
Sure. Looking forward to, as I mentioned, to have a great partnership with the county staff, and also exploring with city council in determining what the future might be for Lehigh at this point. Any uses could be on the table, and we also welcome the residents' voice as well, as this will have a great impact to our community.
Thank you. And for those of you who are here when I referenced earlier the direction that our board gave to our county staff, it was designed, the motion that I made and that the board approved unanimously, was designed to do two things. It was designed to make sure that the property owner couldn't sort of drive a wedge between the two organizations, meaning the county and the city. It was also designed to make sure that the property owner got a clarity of message, that if the two organizations were working collaboratively, understanding and respecting the proper jurisdiction of each, that that way the folks at Lehigh would get a clear message and wouldn't have to say, wait a minute, I thought I heard one thing over here, thought I heard another thing over there. But again, also just to make sure that there was no pitting one against the other, that we were working together in a way that would ensure the common good of our common constituents. So thank you for that. And then let me just ask, Ms. Wu, any other matters with regard to the site that the city is tracking particularly closely right now? You mentioned the grading.
That is true. So we're tracking very closely on the permitted grading work. And then we are more interested in the future development, as it will have a significant impact in terms of traffic, noise, and any other land use that will impact the existing community.
All right, thank you for that. We will turn now to our county counsel's office, where you'll hear from Ms. Pianka and Ms. Vissers. I would call them Elizabeth, except they're both Elizabeth, so that gets confusing. I'm going to ask them in a moment to introduce themselves and have a couple of questions for them, but I should just mention to the panelists, we've had close to 100 folks join us online. We have 50 plus here, so and we're recording obviously for subsequent listeners. So, 150 folks have taken time out to get deep into this stuff, which is, I know, tough. So thank you to all of you, and thank you to all of you for helping to inform this discussion. Let me go to Ms. Pianka and Ms. Vissers. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell folks who you are and what you do for a living.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Elizabeth Pianka. I'm an acting assistant county counsel in the Office of the County Counsel. And our office provides legal support to the regulatory oversight that the county provides to Lehigh. We also provide legal support to our Board of Supervisors with respect to matters relating to Lehigh. And finally, we defend the county when actions that we have taken relating to Lehigh are challenged.
Hello, and I'm Elizabeth Vissers, and I'm a deputy county counsel also with the county counsel's office.
Thank you very much. Let me start with you, Ms. Pianka. Could you remind all of us the significance of that 2011 vested rights determination, which I mentioned earlier? Because I saw some folks looking at me like, Joe, you said it 3 times and I still don't understand what you're talking about. So let's turn to you.
Certainly. Well, I think you noted the significance that the vested rights determination concluded that there are certain parcels on the Lehigh Quarry that do not require a use permit. But let me step back to kind of how we got to the vested rights determination. So as Supervisor Smidian mentioned, the Lehigh Quarry is approximately 3,500 acres. And mining operations at the quarry started around 1903. And that was before the county had an adopted zoning ordinance. So we did not regulate uses in unincorporated county. In 1948, the county adopted a zoning ordinance, and it required a use permit for a quarrying or a surface quarrying operation like Lehigh. And under legal principles, if you have an existing use that has started prior to the adoption of regulations, you can continue to operate that use. And it's considered vested. And so in 2011, to kind of clear the record and to understand which of the parcels at Lehigh were in fact vested, the Board of Supervisors held a vested rights hearing and determined that 13 of the 19 parcels that make up the quarry were deemed vested and did not require a use permit to conduct surface mining operations. I think something that is important and of note is that the board's 2011 decision was determined the geographic scope of the vested rights for Lehigh. It did not determine really the amount of operations that can occur on those vested parcels. Also, what's important about the 2011 decision is it's a final decision of the Board of Supervisors. The county's action was challenged in late 2011, and we had litigation that went on for 3 or 4 years. And ultimately, the court ruled in favor of the board's determination and upheld the board's determination. So it's considered a final decision by the county.
All right, thank you for that. Ms. Vissers, if I understand the Division of Labor correctly, I think you were the lead on responding to that board referral, pulling together the 10-year history of violations on the site. So let me say thank you for that. But could you provide all of us with a sort of a high-level overview of the findings and summarize what the board's direction was in response to the report? I tried to do some of that earlier, but I want to let you do it in the precise and legal way that is necessary.
Of course. So as you mentioned earlier, we reached out to state, local, and federal agencies, including those that are up here with me, and collected kind of the 10-year history of violations that they had issued to Lehigh. And this was, as Supervisor Simidian mentioned, initially a combination of both the cement plant and quarry. We weren't dividing and figuring out, which violation is from a cement plant operation and which may be from a quarry operation. In total, there were over 2,000 violations, including a little over 30 from the Air Quality Management District, who you heard from earlier, 809 from the Regional Water Board. We also had a few from the Division of Occupational Health and Safety, also known as Cal OSHA. The U.S. Mine Safety and Health Administration had issued 791. And then the City of Cupertino and our county planning department also had several, including the grading violation that was mentioned previously. And then our county hazardous materials compliance program had issued 461 notices of violation to Lehigh for that 10-year period we were examining. As a result of this history of violations, the board directed county council together with administration, meaning the planning department in particular, to do two things. One was to try to determine which violations were related to cement plant operations and which were related to quarry operations, to the extent it was possible to divide them into those categories. And that was in part because, as Supervisor Simidian mentioned, the cement plant operation operates under a use permit, and the quarry operates under, as Elizabeth discussed, the vested rights. So they're kind of different legal regimes. The use permit, as Supervisor Simidian mentioned, included a requirement that the cement plant operation follow all state, local, federal law. And so if we could show that there were violations associated with the cement plant, that would, show that they had not complied with that aspect of the use permit. So we came back in December and divided up the violations to the extent that that's possible. And the board directed county council and administration to move forward with bringing to the planning commission for a public hearing a revocation or modification hearing for the cement plant use permit based on two potential findings. One was that Lehigh had violated the terms of its cement plant use permit, and the other one was for the planning commission to determine if the operation of the cement plant had created a public health or safety nuisance. I don't know if you want me to.
I think that's good.
Okay.
I'm going to say thank you, and I'm going to say thank you for covering some ground that I covered earlier, because I think this goes to the heart of where we are and what comes next, and it was helpful to hear it from two different perspectives and two different voices, just to make sure that everybody knows, okay, where are we in this exercise and what are the next steps. So then, turning now to environmental health, let me ask Dr. Underwood and Mr. Pierce if you would introduce yourselves and clarify the oversight role your agency plays at Lehigh.
Good evening. Marilyn Underwood, Director of Environmental Health. I am relatively new to this position in this county, but getting up to speed on some of our role in the past and also currently. One of the major things we've done in the past and currently still do is the noise ordinance, community noise ordinance, which is county-wide, but also has been applied and issued notice of violations related to the Lehigh site. In addition, here with me tonight is Mickey Pierce, who's comes in, and I'll let him speak about our other part of our role, which is overseeing the hazardous materials and hazardous waste that's generated at Lehigh.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'm Mickey Pierce. I'm with County of Santa Clara, Department of Environmental Health, in our Hazardous Materials Compliance Division. Generally, we are, at the risk of putting a dollar in the acronym jar, known as the CUPA, which is the Certified Unified Program Agency, which means that the state of California has vested us and asked us to take the day-to-day inspection and enforcement of 6 different environmental programs. Those would include underground storage tanks, the generation and storage disposal of hazardous waste, the hazardous materials business plan, which includes submittals of inventories and emergency information for community right to know and emergency responders. Now I'm going to forget them. Above Ground Petroleum Storage Act, on-site treatment of hazardous waste, and the California Accidental Release Program, which is high hazard or large quantities of materials and their potential impacts at offsites. It's modeled after the federal risk management program. I hope that's all.
All right, thank you.
Sorry, and we also do enforce the county's hazardous materials storage ordinance and the county's toxic gas ordinance. And I think that's all.
All right. We'll allow you to come back if there's yet another in a moment. Let me go back to Dr. Underwood, though, and say you mentioned in passing the noise monitoring issue. Could you remind us all of the routine noise monitoring that the county does at Lehigh? What does that entail? How much of it is there? Could you update us on any complaints or violations related to noise that may have occurred in 2022, this past year? And Dr. Underwood, I will tell you that in years past, noise has been quite a topic, so I'll hand it off to you at this point.
I understand that, yeah. So I'm reading the history and been talking to folks that have been involved in this project. Several of them have retired recently, so those of us are trying to get up to speed on what you've experienced in the past. And I did, from reading that, obviously understand that in the 2015-16, a lot of effort was put forth, and working with Lehigh to look at those noise impacts, because there were measurable impacts. from the noise. Again, we do quarterly monitoring. We've done quarterly monitoring since around early 2016. Before that, there was some more investigative monitoring. We also respond to complaints and take in complaints, continue to do that. We issued back in 2016 and 17, as I say, up to 5 notice of violations based on noise. We continue to see complaints, but we did not issue any based on our monitoring after 2017. We did get complaints in 2019, none in 2020, and again, this may coincide with the closure of the cement plant. We got a few in 2021, and none since then, until I will say last week we did get 1 complaint, which we are now following up on.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Pierce, as you mentioned, your group oversees storage of hazardous materials on the site. Could you remind us how often you're out there and what you're looking for when you're there?
Sure. We have a stated inspection frequency of once every 3 years for all the programs I talked about, except for the underground storage tank program. For that program, we are out annually to do inspections. And then while we're on site, what we try to do is give a comprehensive inspection that covers all of the relevant programs at each area. Because of the size and the complexity of the plant, Lehigh has sort of divided itself into 18 different buildings or areas. And so when we visit a building or area, we will attempt to do a full inspection of all the different programs that are relevant there. So we would look at the storage of hazardous materials, the storage of hazardous waste, any rules under our local storage ordinance, including things like secondary containment, labeling, during that single inspection. We do everything from on-site labeling, storage, containment, to full plan review for the above-ground petroleum, which is a professional engineered certified plan talking about how the impacts of a release will be mitigated or diverted or prevented. And the CalARP, or the Accidental Release Program, which again is mitigating or stopping, preventing off-site consequences from any potential release of a high hazard or large quantity material. So we try and consolidate everything to one visit to each area, do everything that's relevant in that area.
I know my question is not a precise one, but how would you characterize compliance with hazardous waste storage requirements over the past year or so?
Over the past year, things have been pretty good. I would say a lot of that is because of the shutdown. With the shutdown, there is less people on site, less processing, less chemical usage. With those things comes less waste generated, so less chances for things like mislabeling a drum or bucket of waste, less on-site, off-site of chemicals, which leads to things like underreporting. So with the slowdown in activities, it's brought the number of violations down quite a bit. I am happy to say that Lehigh is at least staying on top of things. They have filed all of their hazardous materials business plans for all 18 areas in 2023 as they're supposed to. So we're happy to see that still.
Thank you. All right, now let's turn to county planning, the county planning department. Ms. McKyle and Mr. Salisbury, if you could introduce yourselves. Thank you for your patience, and share with us the regulatory role of the agency you're here representing. Planning.
Sure, thank you. Good evening, Lisa McKyle. I'm the Deputy Director for the Department of Planning and Development at the county. I oversee the Planning Services Division at the department as well. And we look at the land use aspects for planning at the county, so general plan conformance and zoning ordinance conformance, which includes the Samara Act, and I won't go into the acronyms. I'll let Mr. Salisbury go into that and the compliance and complexities of managing a quarry at a local level. With that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Mr. Salisbury.
Thank you, Ms. McKyle. My name is Rob Salisbury. I'm a principal planner with Santa Clara County Department of Planning and Development, and I lead the team that administers the county's Surface Mining and Reclamation Act program. That's SMARA. We inspect Lehigh on a monthly basis, and we regulate Lehigh Quarry to ensure that they're operating in compliance with the approved 2012 reclamation plan. We also conduct annual inspections of Lehigh Quarry as required by the Surface Mining and Reclamation Act, and review and approve financial assurance cost estimates to ensure that the county has access to the funds required to reclaim the quarry should the operator be financially unable to do so themselves.
Got it. So, excuse me, that's that leftover cold. Could you please update us on the status of Lehigh's reclamation plan? Excuse me again. And in your answer, could you please clarify whether the county can actually compel Lehigh to submit an amendment?
Certainly, I'd be happy to do that. So Lehigh still operates under the approved 2012 Reclamation Plan Amendment. We expect a new Reclamation Plan Amendment application from Lehigh in mid-May of this year. This revised application will supersede the Reclamation Plan Amendment which Lehigh submitted in 2019, but which was never brought to a hearing. Regarding whether the county can compel Lehigh to submit an application, we can only do so if a Reclamation Plan Amendment is required to correct a violation of SMARA. Currently, we do have an outstanding issue, which is the haul road that was previously mentioned, which was graded without county permission between Lehigh and Stevens Creek Quarry. And this haul road has not yet been fully remediated or dealt with, and the county could compel Lehigh to submit a Reclamation Plan Amendment to address this issue. However, Lehigh has agreed with the department's concurrence to submit a grading abatement application in lieu of a Reclamation Plan Amendment. So other than for the limited purpose of correcting a violation of the Surface Mining and Reclamation Act, we cannot compel Lehigh to submit a Reclamation Plan Amendment application.
Mr. Salisbury, I'm going to throw you a curveball here. That haul road violation was a long time ago, wasn't it? Why is it taking so long to get that issue addressed?
So that is a good question. It has been quite some time. I think we issued the violation in 2017. Partly it's been because it's been related to and associated with, or potentially associated with, Lehigh's future plans, which have been in flux. And that area was included in the 2019 amendment, which was never fully processed. In order to prevent any additional delays and for other reasons, we determined that the appropriate method to deal with that violation was through the grading abatement application, as I mentioned. And that serves the purpose of separating that issue from any other plans that Lehigh might put forth in a broader reclamation plan amendment. So hopefully with that change in tack, we will be able to get that issue dealt with relatively quickly.
Thank you. And has the county planning department issued any violations to Lehigh since our meeting last year?
No, we have not. The last violation that the county issued to Lehigh was in 2019, and that was for unpermitted discharge of sediment into Permanente Creek, which some of the other panelists here referenced.
All right, thank you for that. I should have mentioned earlier and did not, among all the many folks that you see who are here participating, we're also joined by our county planning director, Ms. Jacqueline Anshano. I want to thank her for coming. Makes a long day for all of us. And Dr. Sarah Rudman from our public health department. Thank you to both Ms. Anshano and to Ms. Rudman, Dr. Rudman, for being with us tonight as well. Just so you know, folks are engaged and attentive. Now, we finally get to your questions, so thank you for your patience, but I was hoping that those sort of starter questions would warm everybody up and also cover ground that in our experience, is the basis for a lot of questions and comments we get at our office. Let me start with County Council, and there is a question from a member of the public who wants to know, has Lehigh violated the county ridgeline protection ordinance? And if so, what was the punishment? Ridgeline protection ordinance.
I'd be happy to field that question.
It's to County Council.
Oh,
Okay, I think it's on now. So the county has not issued a notice of violation for any violations of the easement. I think that what we can conclude is that the height of the hilltop, when the easement was granted to the county in 1972, has been reduced over time. And the ridgeline protection easement effectively was a mandate that the height of the hilltop remain at a certain height. I think that the challenge we've had is identifying the causation of the reduction of the height of the hilltop. Supervisor Simitian mentioned earlier in 2021, based on direction from the Board of Supervisors, the county did enter into an agreement with Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District, and that agreement kind of holistically, I think, provides more thoughtful kind of approach in terms of effectively monitoring the height of that ridgeline.
And Mr. Salisbury, you are leaning in, even though you're not a member of the County Council's office. You're a planner. I promise no one here will report you to the State Bar if you have an opinion on the subject. No opinion?
I would just concur with what County Council said.
Oh. Very adept. All right. Then we also have a question for County Council, which is, what does the agreement with Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District cover? And Ms. Bianco, you just referenced this a little bit, so if you could flesh it out a little bit, that would help answer the question, I think.
There we go. I do have notes on this because it's been over a year since I've worked on it. But what it authorizes Mid-Pen to do is to conduct inspections of the easement at the cost of Mid-Pen for the purpose of determining the preservation of the easement height. And it also authorizes the county or Mid-Pen to enforce any specific future violations of the easement. And if Mid-Pen seeks to enforce the specific violation of the easement, then the county and Mid-Pen would enter into what we called a separate assignment agreement of enforcement rights for that specific violation, subject to the county either indicating no intent to enforce the specific violation, failing to pursue enforcement after indicating an intent to enforce, or not responding to an inquiry from Mid-Pen to enforce. Under the agreement, each specific violation would be recorded with the clerk recorder and would be terminated upon completion of the enforcement action as determined by Mid-Pen if they decided not to proceed. So I think a good way of thinking about the agreement is that until 2021, it was the county who had the enforcement rights. Under the agreement, it authorizes, based on certain conditions, for Mid-Pen to also have enforcement rights for future violations of the ridgeline protection easement.
And that's why I call it belt and suspenders. If one agency doesn't step in, there's another agency who is authorized to engage in enforcement actions. All right. Another question for County Council. Can the blighted hillside at Lehigh be restored, and how do we prevent more of this? As has been mentioned by
the planning department and others, what we have in place for the portion of the Lehigh property that encompasses the quarry is a reclamation plan. And that's a requirement under state law that is imposed on all mining operations that requires when the mining operation closes to reclaim the property such that it's not left as effectively a scar on the natural landscape. For purposes of Lehigh, the last reclamation plan was approved in 2012, and the current end use is open space for that reclamation plan. Although, as noted, it may be amended. An application for an amendment may come into the county shortly.
All right. Question is, has Lehigh, this again for council, has Lehigh ever paid any penalty for any of their violations? If so, how much and for how many? Understanding that you may not have your data right there. Ms. Vissers, do I see you leaning in?
Yes. So I know that they have paid penalties for some of the violations covered in the violation report that came from some of these other agencies. So I will let them speak to those violations. From what I was aware, at least the violations that I covered in the 10 years, I won't go back further than that. I'm not aware of penalties having been paid on the planning department violations, although the planning department can correct me if I'm wrong. And that relates to there's state law that requires the county to provide a corrections period before penalties, fines may be imposed. So we can't say, here's a notice of violation and right away we're issuing you a fine. We have to provide an opportunity to address the violation first, and then if they fail to do so, at that point we could impose a fine.
Thank you very much. And the last question, at least for the moment, for County Council is, does Lehigh's vested rights allow new businesses to be started on the vested lands without needing county approval? And I will just tease this one a little bit by saying this has been a fascinating subject of conversation at the county. County Council?
The short answer is no. So the vested right that was granted was for a quarry surface mining operation. I do think the answer, though, is a little nuanced. When Lehigh submitted its reclamation plan in 2019, it proposed to start new mining operations on vested parcels that had not previously been mined. And as I mentioned earlier, the 2011 vested rights determination by the board identified the geographic scope of Lehigh's vested right, but didn't identify kind of the intensity. And there is really, the county in 2019 and 2020 was going through a separate test to determine whether the proposed new quarrying activity would substantially change the nature of the vested operation or impermissibly intensify the quarry operation. Ultimately, that 2019 application has been suspended, so that review was never completed, but that would be the test we would apply if there were new quarrying operations proposed.
I heard a couple of key words. I want to stay on this topic for just a minute because it's an important one about what does vested rights really mean. I heard you say intensify or change uses means all of a sudden there's a new conversation, yes?
Correct.
I'm going to be a little bit silly on purpose to try and underscore this. Vested rights sounds pretty absolute, but for example, if the property owner came and said, I'd like to build a Bloomingdale's on the site, you'd say, you don't have a vested right to do that.
That's correct.
Or an auto mall.
Correct.
Okay, so the key issue is there a change in use or an intensification of use that would mean the rights are no longer vested?
It would mean that with respect to the new activities being proposed, it wouldn't fall within the prior vested determination.
Good, thank you. Going to let the County Counsel's office take a breath for a minute and turn to the Water Board because we have a question about the 15 million gallon spill. And the first question, it's kind of a two-part question. That's how you know it's my district, by the way. We have two-part questions in our district. The first question is, how much water is 15 million gallons in terms of the amount of water that a person in the Bay Area might use per year? So is there a way to characterize what 15 million gallons is? Anybody?
Do we use 50 gallons per person per day? This is a quiz.
Okay.
It's a lot. 15 million gallons of drinking water discharged to the creek is a really significant amount of water. I don't know what to compare it to.
I think it's a delightfully non-technical answer. The answer is 15 million gallons is a lot. Okay.
And I'm an engineer, so I'm proud of that.
Okay.
Non-technical answer.
That's a good. Then let's try this part of the question, which is the sort of the bottom line. Did the 15 million gallons spill scour the creek or other land?
I do not know the answer to that question, but I'd be happy to follow up with you and provide more information. It did make it to the creek, and that is a lot, so that's definitely something our enforcement team is investigating right now.
Let me ask if anybody else has an answer, and if not, I'm going to turn to my own staff and ask if, Ms. Loquist, are we going to, again, at the end of the meeting, indicate that we're going to try and get answers to all of these questions, even if we don't get to them tonight, and put those answers on the website so that people can get access to the answer to their questions? And so for those of you who are saying, time is running and we're not going to get to all these questions, which is true, we'll try to get to all of them online, and we tap into the expertise that you see here and others to get those questions answered. All right, let's try planning. State law requires, this is the assertion of the questioner, state law requires reclamation concurrent with mining. There has been no significant progress. Active mining ceased in March 2012. Why no progress? Not even an interim management. County allowed mining contingent on a 2012 plan. Now the county says they're awaiting a new plan. Why? That's the question, times 3. Is there a piece of that that somebody can bite off and take a response to?
Yeah, I can.
Thanks, Mr.
Provide
Salisbury.
a response. So state law does certainly encourage that reclamation be done concurrently or in phases. As one portion of a property is mined and mining is completed, again, state law encourages that reclamation occur in that phased manner. However, the reclamation plan by itself does not dictate, in the case of the approved plan for Lehigh, does not dictate specific timing for when activities will occur. Typically for a use like a quarry, that type of timing and requirements would be contained within conditions of approval under a use permit, which Lehigh does not have. So the bottom line is the rec plan specifies how specifically the quarry will be reclaimed when it is ultimately reclaimed, but it does not provide the county with the ability to dictate exactly when reclamation will occur, except and unless a quarry becomes idle, which is a condition having to do with volume of material produced by that quarry. And in that case, if a quarry were determined to be idle, they could basically have the site be mothballed for up to 15 years. And at the end of that 15-year period, a quarry would either have to restart their operation or at that time proceed to full reclamation of the site. At the moment, Lehigh is not idle.
And as you hear a little mumbling in the crowd here, so it depends on your definition of idle, and there is a legal definition of idle that you are obliged to consider. Is that a fair summary?
That is correct.
Okay. Related, the question for planning is, any estimate when materials processing will end and backfilling the pit will begin?
I hesitate to provide any kind of guess or estimate. It's really we'll know a lot more after we see the revised application that we expect from Lehigh shortly.
And related to that is a question, what are the plans for site restoration? When is it likely to begin?
Again, the same answer, that really is largely going to be dependent upon the revised plan that Lehigh is going to submit and whether they do propose to continue mining activities or whether they're going to proceed with importing material or proposing to import material to backfill the main pit. I can say that they are relatively close to being able to start work on restoration of Permanente Creek. That's a restoration project that was required under the 2012 reclamation plan. And the comment period for the EIR that we prepared for that project is about to close. Once a response to comments for that EIR has been prepared, the county will be able to issue the requisite grading permit, at which time Lehigh could, after getting other jurisdictional permits, they could begin work on restoration of Permanente Creek.
Thanks. Mr. Celebrate, I'm going to say to the public who's here and watching, and I'm going to invite anyone and everyone on the panel to have a different point of view if you like, which is always a little risky in my position, but with this many experts. To me, this is why it is important that we nail down the plant closure and the end of quarrying activity, because while some restoration and reclamation work can, probably will, begin before those two things happen, if we really want to get to the restoration and reclamation, we need to in my judgment, we need to nail down the plant's closed, the quarry activity is stopped. Now, let's turn our attention to the long-term task, which is indeed a long-term task of site restoration and reclamation. So that's part of, I want folks to understand my thinking in pursuing the agenda that I'm pursuing. I'm going to get the name of the movie wrong because I didn't see it, but I think it was called something like Everything Everywhere All at Once. I don't think that works very well for this particular project. I think we have to be clear and specific about what our goals are, and that's why I keep pounding home those 1, 2, 3 goals, because I think you got to do number 1 and number 2 to get to the good place, which is number 3. All right. Another question for planning. Well, I think this has been addressed, but I'm going to ask it one more time anyway, just to get it out there. When do we think Lehigh will submit their new reclamation plan? And how soon can the public view it and comment? Why don't we walk through that process? So I said earlier, and staff may have more accurate or up-to-date information, that we were thinking it might be as soon as May that we see a new reclamation plan amendment submitted. Any update on that? Let's start there.
As far as we know, that is still accurate. We do have monthly meetings with Lehigh and their staff. And at the last meeting, Lehigh indicated to us that mid-May was still the time frame for when they expect to submit a new plan. And as far as when the public can view it, within a few days of that application being submitted, it will be up on our website. And we will send an email to everybody who signed up to be on the Lehigh interested parties list, notifying them that the plan has been submitted and providing a link as to where it can be found and viewed.
Okay. So, Mr. Celebrate, forgive me because I'm going to be repetitive on purpose. When the plan is submitted, which ultimately is a decision that Lehigh and Lehigh makes alone, you will in very short order make sure that that entire document is publicly available online, yes?
Correct.
And in order to provide comment, there will be an environmental review process, yes?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, you don't want your mic to go dead on that one. And that environmental review process will entail something called an environmental impact report, yes?
Yes.
And before that document is issued, there'll be something called a draft environmental impact report, yes?
Correct.
And that will give everybody anywhere in the world the opportunity to offer comment, yes?
Yes.
And following those comments, the professionals who are preparing the environmental impact report will be obliged to respond to the comments so that folks know that their comments were received, understood, and acted upon in some way.
Correct.
Okay. Not everyone in the room is an EIR or CEQA expert. There are some questions for me, so take a breath. What's the status of acquisition, and when will we know what options the county is considering? I would say the ball is in Lehigh's court. I am hoping, as part of this next effort, will communicate what they'd like to do with the site. When I tossed out the idea some time ago of possible acquisition, it was really my way of saying it's time for us to have a new vision for the site. And I think whether that comes about by county acquisition, which is a challenge given the cost and given the fact that Lehigh is the property owner and may have other plans in mind, whether that happens by acquisition or by some other set of alternative uses remains to be seen. I should be very clear, I am not focused primarily on county acquisition, notwithstanding the fact that I tossed that idea into the public arena. I am focused on, I know you've heard this before, closing the plant, closing the quarry, beginning the restoration and reclamation process. So I can give you all a very I don't know, we'll see on that one. Then the question is the county or the state or cities going to buy the land? What would the sale price be? I don't know. We'll see is the answer to that one as well. This one says, the proposal seems to leave the door open for a revised use permit. Under what conditions would you allow a revised permit? When we talked about sending the matter of the permit to the Planning Commission, it was for possible, underline possible, revocation, meaning gone, or amendment, meaning changed. As I said at the outset, I think the most important thing is to get the plant closure nailed down. If we can get that nailed down, I, for one, am prepared to take a pause and let the folks at the county and the folks at Lehigh sit down and negotiate a recommended, I want to underscore recommended, that doesn't mean final decision, a recommended set of amendments to the use permit, which would then, I believe Ms. Vissers and Ms. Bianca have to go to the Planning Commission if there was a formal amendment to the use permit that exists today. If people didn't like the action that the Planning Commission provides, I believe that decision is then appealable to our Board of Supervisors, yes? So, there's a lot happening on the site. I often get people who understandably, and in my view totally appropriately, say, well, what about this and what about that and what about this and what about that? To which I usually say, all of those are important and legitimate issues, but again, I'm focused on making sure we don't take our eye off the prize, which is getting a permanent, legally binding commitment through the use permit process to close the plant. That's the goal. So what else happens is to be determined, and you all will have an opportunity to weigh in on that. That is not something, I'm going to look again to both planning and to county council, that is not something that could or would be revised unilaterally by staff. Yes, correct? Okay, you see nodding heads for those who are wondering why they don't hear anything. And I think that's enough of me, frankly. Let's go back to air. Here's a question with a point of view. Why did BACMed, Bay Area Air Quality Management District engineers, cave to the request by their legal team to recalculate the cancer risk, but not to stridently? And then they ran out of paper. So Bay Area Air Quality Management District, anybody have an opinion or a point of view or some information about this this question? I'll hand it to you. I'm not sure that it'll give you any more clarity than I did.
Yeah, I'm not sure when this occurred. Can we ask?
All right. We will follow up on that one online and do the best we can to get an answer. We got somebody else who says, I did some research as part of green building work I do. I understand that burning coke to bake gypsum, again, this is what I love about my district. I understand that burning coke to bake gypsum not only emits greenhouse gases, but also emits a significant amount of mercury into the atmosphere, and that the quarry was one of the biggest polluters in the country. Is that true? Please.
Yeah, burning coke is not good. Burning coke is about the dirtiest fuel you can burn. So it's dirtier than coal, and there are a fair amount of heavy metals in it. The amount of heavy metals and the type of heavy metals would depend on where you're getting the coke, and it can vary. I can say with some confidence that it was among the biggest polluters in the Air District jurisdiction. Definitely up there on scale with an oil refinery.
And my recollection is that there was a national settlement with the U.S. EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, that dealt with air quality issues. Was this part of that national settlement?
There was a national settlement to which the Air District was a party as well. It was initiated by EPA, an enforcement action on some violations that the EPA had asserted regarding permitting, and we were a party to that. The Department of Justice tried to get that consent decree to stay in place, but unfortunately the judge decided since the plant had shut down, the consent decree was no longer really necessary.
All right. And then a question from someone who says, I'm concerned about the dust particles and other hazardous pollution affecting the neighborhood. What are we looking at today?
So I can tell you that Air District staff conduct weekly surveillance patrols of the facility and the surrounding areas. One of the things that is likely to be of interest to the folks in Cupertino, especially even post-closure of the plant as we get into hopefully reclamation sometime soon, is we are looking at strengthening our dust our dust regulations. And so that process is getting started in earnest over the next few months, and you'll be seeing some materials from us about that, and we definitely welcome participation from the folks down here on making sure that we have the most stringent possible dust regulations.
Breaking a little news. Okay, I'm going to point at the gentleman in the third row, and I apologize for doing that, but if he wanted to make sure his voice was heard in the consideration and adoption of those regulations, tell us again what he could or should do.
At this point, if I may volunteer your staff, Supervisor?
Please volunteer myself. I do it all the time.
Just following your example. If the individual who is interested in participating in that could send their contact information to Supervisor Smidian's staff, his staff can pass those on to us, and then when we do our outreach, we'll be sure and include them.
And while you're volunteering the staff in our office, I'll volunteer them as well by asking them to please make sure that rather than wait to hear from people, we actually take the opportunity to try and communicate with the interested parties list, which is a list that we have of, I want to say 150 to 200 folks these days, that this opportunity is presenting itself, and we'll share it with that group and they'll share it through their networks as well.
That is excellent, thank you. So when we get to that outreach point, we'll contact your staff and ask them to send that out.
All right, thank you. I'm afraid we are running out of time. I'm keeping my eye on the clock. I wanted to respect our 8:30 p.m. end time. So at this point, I want to thank the panelists once again. Panelists, your presence is indispensable. It's crucial to the success of the evening. And I hope that folks who are physically present, and even if you're at home, will join me in giving them what I think is a well-deserved round of applause for taking the time to be here tonight. Thank you again to the City of Cupertino for hosting us, and really, it just, as I say, makes it a community event in a way that doing it at the County Government Center it doesn't always lend itself to. Want to thank those of you who showed up tonight, either in person or virtually, for your interest. And I want to do something I've never done before, so I'm going to ask you to pause for just a moment. Hold that thought. I want to thank the folks at Lehigh, also known as Heidelberg Materials, for engaging in an important discussion right now with the county about the future of this site, and for making the commitment that they have made to shutter the cement plant. So I not only want to get that on the record again, you may have noticed how I managed to do that, but I also want to say thank you. I am hopeful that we are at an inflection point and that things are going to move in a different direction that is positive for all parties involved. And as I mentioned at the outset of tonight's conversation, 3 simple goals: close the cement plant, put an end to new quarrying activity, and let's start the cleanup and restoration of the site at the earliest possible opportunity. With that, I will say at 8:30 sharp, thank you all again for being here. Thank you for all the good work you do all year round, and thank you for being here tonight. Take care and keep letting us know what's going on. We will get to questions online.